Hi, everyone, and welcome to another really exciting episode of Voice of Crypto's podcast, where we get distinguished guests from the Web3, crypto, blockchain, NFT, and the metaverse space. And today we have with us two really exciting guests. We have Connor and Jonny with us. And before we go ahead and proceed with this entire episode, I would love for you to introduce yourselves to our viewers and listeners today. Hi, Connor. Hi, Jonny. Could you give a quick introduction of yourselves?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Bruni. Obviously, it's brilliant to be on the podcast. So a little bit about me. My name is Connor Wells. I currently am the head of hair care for Dyson. Previous experience worked for L'Oreal within a marketing capacity, so very much my kind of forte is within branding. Worked there for about 7 years between London and Paris, and a little bit more of a kind of strategic role. Then, in terms of how I kind of came into the Web3 space, I think during the kind of bull market when everyone was talking about NFTs and a pure art kind of capacity, I recognized that there was a huge opportunity to leverage that for brands to actually reach their more traditional KPIs. So then I joined forces with Jonny, who also is on the call, and we've got a team called Not Another NFT, which we co-founded together. And what we do ultimately is work with brands, find out a way to kind of strategize how they can leverage Web3 and the technology behind, blockchain technology to actually move forward and again, reach their kind of marketing goals.
Yeah, so that's pretty amazing, Jonny. What about you? If you could just give us a quick briefer about what you've been up to.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. My name's Jonny. I also used to work with Connor at L'Oreal. However, I worked from the commercial side, so I'm working with retailers, with our clients. I'm now working for a food business, but equally, I'm also running Not Another NFT alongside Connor and our other business partner, Elliot. So Connor did a great explanation of what Not Another NFT is, so I won't go into detail, but yeah, really pleased to be here.
Same here. It's really good to have you both here and hoping to get some pretty amazing insights around branding, marketing, and a lot of businesses trying to leverage Web3 and the growth of this sector. So, Connor, I will start with you. You
Sure.
did mention how a lot of businesses have been wanting to leverage Web3 as a technology sector. Could you speak a little bit more about that? How a lot of businesses are transitioning to Web3 and how exactly are you guys, where do you guys come into picture?
Absolutely. I think there's been a kind of stat that's been running around LinkedIn for a long time now. I think at the end of 2022, a third of Interbrand's top 100 brands have actually launched Web3 initiatives. It does sound really exciting. I think we're very much in its infancy. I do think that lots of brands leverage the technology not very well, if I'm really honest. I think there's a lot of kind of room and scope to refine the process as to how brands actually go into the space. And I think that works kind of in a little bit more of a traditional marketing way. So I'm obviously a traditional marketeer. So ultimately what we do as a kind of an agency is we educate and of course inform businesses as to how they do that, and we give them the questions that they can ask themselves in order to build a strong plan. So obviously there are many different ways that brands, and we speak to brands about how they can leverage it. So of course shoppability and very much accelerating their e-commerce efforts with things like a metaverse. Obviously there's tokenized marketing aspects through NFTs, which we'll talk about. We're working with Keith Skincare at the moment on the first to market project, which is really, really exciting. I'm sure I'll get the opportunity to talk about that in a moment. But obviously there are other brands who have entered the space, and as I said earlier on, they've entered it to kind of jump into Web3 because their competitors are doing it. It's not necessarily a strategic movement. So what we do, go in, have a bit of a business diagnosis, understand the more traditional KPIs that brands are working towards, and then kind of strip that back and say, right, how can we leverage this technology and how can we make it work for them so that they can move forward and bolster their advocacy plan, win more loyal customers, engage with their customers, build out strong communities. Because historically, the way that brands have built out communities, well, if you go to a business nowadays and you say, right, okay, so say you're building a great community and you have an amazing product, how are you actually engaging with that community? And the majority of people will come back and they'll say, well, we're leveraging social media. We've got an amazing Instagram, or we've got a great Twitter. That's fantastic, but it's basic, especially today. So there are lots of different service providers that we work with that allow you to really kind of harness that community and like I said, bolster it. So that's very much kind of my take on the industry right now, and then how we kind of play a part in trying to make that a little bit, well, Web3 works stronger for businesses, I think.
Anything to add, Jonny, to what Connor said?
Just to add though, one thing we do make clear when we are speaking with businesses is that using Web3, it's not just, you need to allocate the correct resources. You can't expect to launch an NFT project or, you know, have this metaverse solution and just think it's going to run itself on its own. You need to allocate the right resources because it can be used as a tool to identify those super fans, get closer to your community, get more out of them, but you need to make sure that you are allocating the right time and resources towards it as well.
Absolutely. When we, yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, Veronica, I just wanted to add another thing as well. And honestly, Jonny and I do this a lot. We kind of bounce off each other. We very much kind of make each other's brains tick a little bit, which is brilliant because obviously we're co-founders together. But what I will say is that for a lot of brands, it's really scary coming into the space. And that's often why they make mistakes. And I think that what they need to recognize, and there's a really, really great quote from the current Nike CEO, because obviously Nike with Artifact and their kind of integration in the space and very much bringing that resource in-house. It's been honestly inspiring to watch from someone who works for a big brand. And their focus is very much, this is an extension of their existing digital marketing strategy, which I love. It's not something that sits in isolation. It's an extension of something that you're already doing very well. That allows you to very much supercharge your business and supercharge your consumer pool. That's really, really exciting. So what businesses need to recognize is that they've done this already with the digital transformation that happened in 2015 to 2020. I know it happened slightly before that, but that's when brands very much got on board properly and started to understand what their digital transformation was. But for us, we kind of tell businesses not to be worried. It's okay. Again, it's just that extension. So they've done it before and they can do it again with Web3.
Yes. I do agree with you when you said that a lot of businesses are scared to make this move from Web2 to Web3, but they've already done this, right? Still, however, with the regulatory challenges, with the reporting that mainstream media does on the Web3 space, is marketing for Web3 clients a lot more difficult than marketing for Web2 or Web1 clients?
It's a difficult one to say because and John, you might want to add to this, but because you can see it from a little bit more outside. So for context, Jonny is slightly more technical. Mm-hmm. I'm slightly more marketing oriented, which I think we've gathered. I've never worked in a educational capacity for businesses in Web2 marketing. I've only ever really been a strategist and a kind of operator or an activator in Web2. I think that one of the biggest challenges, of course, that brands face within Web3, and certainly we've seen it when we've worked with the likes of Heath on projects. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is finding the right service providers. Of course, there are still, big barriers to entry. So we've been kind of scoping out the market now to try and find a way to add a token gate in the most cost-effective way for a kind of bit more of a low commitment strategy, which Heath wanted to launch when they were kind of delving into the Web3 space. Heath, for example, for context, they're a male skincare brand based here in the UK, and they're about to launch their first kind of NFT initiative, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But I think that's been the most difficult thing, trying to kind of, siphon through these different service providers, find the best one that works and something that isn't clunky, trying to keep things really seamless. Mm-hmm. Seamless solutions exist in Web2. Yeah. Seamless solutions don't necessarily exist yet in Web3. And I think when they do exist and they are really seamless, they're quite expensive. So I think it's quite easy for big corporations to get involved within Web3. But for slightly smaller businesses, you have to be a little bit more kind of creative as to how you approach that, that project. What we tend to do is, obviously, we have bigger scale projects with clients that have a lot more money, but the team also works with smaller scale clients as well. And what we try to do with them is launch what we call a low commitment strategy. So it's a very, very similar kind of a similar initiative to what Levi's did. So if you're familiar with the Levi's initiative, honestly, for me, it was ingenious. It's actually probably one of my favorite kind of NFT Web3 initiatives that I've seen. So I think they isolated it to the country of France, and obviously Levi's are a multinational company. Isolated it to France. I think they launched 10 pairs of jeans, which had a lifetime guarantee with this new technology material, which was kind of a new play on cotton, which was sustainable. So again, linking it back to the brand equity of Levi's. So even though it was a separate Web3 initiative, it still had that direct impact on their brand equity and how people saw them. Then they had QR codes around all of their stores within France. They had people go up, scan the QR code, enter this competition, therefore giving people a bit of a taster into Web3 and what an NFT is. They had educational touch points. And then, of course, you entered into a competition. And if you won, you obviously got that physical pair of trousers. Now, Levi's in their budget, they could have done something extremely complex, very big, high scale, which could have actually had a big negative effect on their primary kind of master brand. The beauty of adopting a low commitment strategy is that you get to kind of ease your way into the space. You're mitigating the risk of ruining your current brand equity, and it's also more cost effective. So actually, that's very much the approach that we take with smaller clients, given the fact that right now, budget limitations mean that you can't always have the most seamless experience.
Right.
Yeah, and just to add, I think about the marketing it is the unknowns. A lot of businesses and brands don't really know who the best service partners are. They don't know what's going on, and as you know, this industry moves so quickly. Even in like a bear market like we are right now, it moves pretty quickly. You're seeing new products, new services come out all the time. There's always new UX, and I think one thing that businesses and brands need to be aware of is not just taking your marketing team or your digital team and using them to activate a Web3 plan. You need to speak to people that have their ears to the ground, speak to agencies that are doing this every single day, because otherwise they're going to miss the mark. They're going to try and activate something that we've seen other brands do incorrectly, and as Connor said, it's just going to dilute their brand equity, and it's going to kind of fragment who they are. So yeah, I think that's really important as well.
I have a great example on that, actually. I was at dinner last week with a big kind of entertainment agency. They're one of the biggest in the world. They represent athletes, they represent musicians, and lots of kind of other kind of profiles. When I was on the discussion at the dinner table, we kind of got onto the topic of Web3 and kind of this new kind of digital evolution. And one of the commercial agents said to me that they have people all the time coming up to them saying, hey, we'd love to launch with your artist this amazing NFT. You'll make loads of money. It's going to be brilliant. They kind of come with a concept. And he was petrified because there's a lot of negative connotations, obviously, around the space. There's some negative associations with crypto, with NFTs, which is natural with things that kind of are quite new and new tech that not a lot of people really understand to the full. But his way of mitigating that risk of taking on board someone who's going to build an NFT for one of his talents was kind of, we need to work with people who do have their ear to the ground, like Jonny said, so that they can come in and they can kind of say, right, look, this looks like a good idea. They seem like they have their head screwed on. They know the industry. We kind of vetted them, because there is a lot of uncertainty. So I think that's just an example of the market at the moment, a very kind of traditional business model who is so apprehensive and on the fence about adopting this new technology and monetizing this new technology, don't necessarily want to take the step forward because they're too worried. And I think that's where the kind of key comes in, because our primary objective, and not another, is to educate. We love educating. We feel like that's absolutely the kind of core behind everything. We've got a partnership with Kingston University at the moment. We're working with them to take their kind of MBA classes through kind of lectures and this new technology. We're trying to launch an initiative with them at the moment. But yeah, like you have to educate so that people are actually informed to make the right decisions in the space.
Absolutely. You did mention about how a lot of businesses are transitioning to Web3. So are there any particular reasons that founders seek for before they are make the shift, or is it mostly hype driven, or because their competitors are doing it, as you said?
John, you want to take it, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can take it, and I'm sure you can add to it. I think one thing that they're aware of is when we have this kind of internet transformation, digital transformation back in the early 2000s, the retail environment is made up of businesses that were around before that, and then the e-commerce brands, e-commerce retailers, for example, Amazon. Okay, that wasn't here before the internet. Now, there are retailers that we know of are no longer here. So the retail environment is made up of ones that were quick to move and quick to adapt with this new technology, and the native e-commerce people. Okay, so I think what they're aware of is that this could happen again. If they don't move with the technology, they're going to have their lunch eaten by the newcomers. And so I think that's one thing that they're very conscious of, is what is the competitors doing and are they keeping up with the technology? Because if you don't move, you're going to get left behind. And that's happened before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a really good example of that, John, was Nokia. So obviously it's a bit of a basic example, but I still think it's a really good one. Obviously, I think Nokia were the first to create a kind of cellular network in the world. And then they were kind of late to the race with the smartphones. So they ultimately lost a ton of market share and lost out within that race. So I think that's a really good example of brands missing out, and they don't want to miss out now. You're absolutely right. But on that point, Varuni, I think it's important to note that the hastiness of being kind of petrified of missing out can lead to poor projects. And we've seen them before. I don't necessarily want to kind of talk about specific brands, but one of the things that we're really conscious about, particularly because, well, I'm a branding native, as I mentioned, and I think there's a really, really great opportunity for brands to leverage Web3 and leverage things like NFT initiatives to very much bolster their brand. So drive their brand equity, drive their purpose. So you see a lot of brands now, for example, L'Oreal, it's all around female empowerment. They have lots of other brands that kind of have different purposes, but that's very much the biggest one. And they're launching initiatives now that will be able to kind of bolster that purpose that they actually have. And that really is the most exciting thing, truly, for me. Now, the problem is when you get a Web3 project or initiative wrong, or you deviate from that initial brand equity that you have, you can dilute your brand and you can get scrutiny from it. For example, full disclosure, I think H&M are a phenomenal brand. They launched a metaverse initiative, which is all around sustainability. Now, H&M sit on a lot of unused stock. They're not necessarily, they epitomize fast fashion, essentially, which is a great thing for a lot of people. But when you're trying to kind of build this purpose, which is sustainable, which isn't a true fit to your in real life business and your traditional brand that you actually run today, then you can come across as a little bit disauthentic, and then they get picked up in the press and people talk about them, they scrutinize them, you get it has a negative impact on the brand that you've been building for years. So that is the danger of kind of rushing and being slightly hasty when you're launching a Web3 project. And this is what we try to educate brands to do.
All right. So how does the procedure look like? Do you handhold brands throughout their entire branding marketing process? And how do you onboard projects?
It's a really good question. I think so. What we do, so ultimately, like I said, we primarily talk about ourselves as educators and strategists. Obviously, different brands and businesses that have different needs will change. What we do is that we built what we call the Launchpad method. So this is ultimately the questions that brands should ask themselves when launching a brand, a brand building Web3 project. So it's quite simple. This is generally where we start. So the first point of action would be going into a business, doing a bit of a health check, doing a bit of a diagnostic, understanding where their pain points lie, what their current business is struggling in, or what they're doing really well in that they want to accelerate. That's really very much the first process. Second is then adopting the Launchpad method. So we presented the Launchpad method at NFT London. We're about to present it next week or in 2 weeks when we go to NFT NYC. So we're really excited about that. But the Launchpad method is essentially, like I said, the questions that brands should ask themselves. So it's centered around what we call a founding principle.
Yeah.
So this is all about kind of establishing what your current brand equity and identity is, to make sure that every single thing that you're doing with your Web3 initiative relates back to this brand identity. Because as we mentioned, the worst thing that a brand can do is become disauthentic or fragment themselves. The second is basically 4 key goals. John, what I'll do is I'll take the first 2 and then you can take the second 2. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So ultimately these 4 goals, so the first two kind of goals are all about engaging with your existing brand community as a Web2 brand. and then taking them and converting and educating them into Web3.
Yeah.
So they comprise of customer centricity. So it's obviously having a true value proposition. There are many brands out there that have launched initiatives which didn't have a value proposition. I think since Pizza Hut have kind of figured it out, and they've got a pretty good Web3 initiative now. But I think their first step into Web3 was a little bit of a strange one. I think they just minted some kind of 6-bit images of pizzas, which were, they had no, there was no incentive behind them, no reward, absolutely nothing. And I think that was just, again, an example of a hasty decision to go into Web3 because they were scared of missing out. But I really do think that, I think that now they've sorted it out, but of course you have to have that centricity. You have to give people reward. So that's obviously something that we're really passionate about, having that value proposition. The second is all about breaking barriers, make it really easy for people to come on to your current website, recognize that there's an opportunity to buy into an NFT or use your NFT, and then have that kind of seamless journey. So this is obviously why we work with service providers who can offer that seamless journey. We work primarily with this incredible service provider called Perks. They're actually a Shopify plugin by business, but they also have lots of different capabilities in terms of building bespoke, seamless token gates, things that very much, just like seamlessly integrate into your brand. But breaking barriers is just about onboarding people who are in Web2 and bringing them directly into your kind of Web3 initiative. So those are the first two. And as I mentioned, that's all about taking your existing brand community and then converting them and bringing them into Web3 seamlessly.
Yeah, and then the second two are around kind of converting into that Web3 community. So we know that point 3 is gamification. So a lot of the best projects do gamification in a really innovative and exciting way, and it can be in subtle ways, such as just encouraging conversations. And what I mean by that is maybe not including everything on the roadmap, leaving some speculation, leave people guessing, and then launching these added extras that get customers excited. That's a simple form of gamification. And then on the other end of the scale, you've kind of got what Starbucks have kind of gone in for on their NFT project, which is running competitions, making them play mini games. Obviously that's gamification, but you've got to find that balance of both of them, and using the both of them at the same time is a really good way to just get more engagement out of your community and to get more engagement out of those super fans that we spoke about earlier. So the last one is continuity and longevity. Now, as Connor touched on with the low commitment strategy earlier, it's really important that we develop that low commitment strategy, learn from it, learn how the customers react, and then build that into more of a long-term plan to add value to your brand and to your customers. Because ultimately, a low commitment strategy is brilliant to dip your toe in the water, but you want to do something that's going to be appealing to your wider customer base. Connor, have you got anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we often do is when we, if we're educating businesses in terms of how they can launch into Web3, we often start with this low commitment strategy so they don't get terrified about building something which is huge. And then we build it into maybe a two or a kind of 3-phase plan, because obviously then they can see that longevity. What I'll do to give you kind of a better indication, if I may, I'll spend 2 minutes talking around how we've worked with Heath Skincare in terms of how we've adopted this launchpad method. I think that might be wise, right, John?
Yeah, give an example. I like it.
Cool. So basically, the diagnostic very much with Heath. So Heath are a male skincare brand, founded in 2017. They're made in England. They have a global footprint. They launch in 12 different countries, and then they also have they're one of the fastest growing male skincare brands in the UK, within kind of the key retail outlets such as Boots. So obviously, they're in a very good position. One of the challenges that they have is trying to cut through the space from an advocacy perspective. So when I talk about advocacy, I'm talking about their influencer pool, essentially, and giving their influencer pool something additional, which will allow them to better kind of engage with the brand. And of course, by doing that, you naturally get press coverage, you get exposure to your brand, and you get awareness. So ultimately, it's just kind of finding a way to do that. So what we said is that they could adopt a low commitment strategy. So in terms of the founding principle, we found ourselves thinking, okay, fine, what's the identity of Heath? Their identity is very much they're a lifestyle brand. They're not just a skincare brand, they're a lifestyle brand. So they very much want to kind of play on that lifestyle aspect, bring their brand to life in a very artistic way. They're also kind of reframing skincare as a wellness moment. So we wanted to make sure that things like the rewards and the perks that these people get who have an NFT are all centered around that kind of wellness aspect. So we're always bringing it back to the brand identity and obviously bringing it back to the initial KPI, which is supercharging their advocacy pool and bringing them, making sure that they're more engaged with the brand. So that's very much kind of the first steps in terms of the diagnosis. Then we go into the different four kind of pillars. So customer centricity, spoke about this a little bit earlier on. So the value proposition for the holders of this kind of low commitment strategy Web3 initiative is that they can then receive the rewards and the perks, which honestly are quite sizable. So as I mentioned, this is a low commitment strategy. So there are a total of 15 NFTs to be won. There's going to be a great big launch event at the Maximilian William Gallery in Fitzrovia in London. So it's a beautiful gallery, very much bringing the products to life. That's where people are going to come. We're going to adopt a little bit more of a Levi's method where people come, they kind of scan the QR codes and they get entered into a competition. We're going to have an NFT education station. We're going to have obviously lots of platforms online to make sure that, you know, they can become educated on the NFTs, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But it's very much kind of bringing this low commitment strategy to life. 15 NFTs, each of those NFTs will unlock a series of benefits, which you can then find on the existing website. That takes me on to the second point, which is all about breaking those barriers. The majority of the people who actually want to be part of the Heath community, they probably know what Web3 is, they probably know what NFTs are, but they've probably never been involved in an initiative, at least in terms of figures, probably 70 or 67% of them actually haven't. So what we wanted to do is find a really seamless way to actually onboard them onto the process. So that's by doing things like hosting an event, making sure that there's an education station for NFTs, making sure that there's a really seamless and strong landing page with FAQs that they can easily access, making sure that there's kind of a direct line that they can call if they want to find out a little bit more about the project. And then of course, having the current integration of the NFT itself and the launch, which is actually called the Founders Club, into the website. So if you go onto the website, on the top navigation bar, you'll see Founders Club NFT. You click on that, takes you through to an existing product page with all of the different rewards and perks that directly link back to the Heath equity. You can click on one. Then we've worked with Perks, who are the service provider that we use in terms of token gating, who have built this amazing kind of plugin, which allows you then, you click on one of the different NFTs, you get a pop-up, it says connect your wallet, and then it spits out the redemption code for you to go and then redeem that actual perk. So it's actually a very, very seamless way. And that's how we've broken those kind of barriers. Gamification, can't talk too much about that because obviously I don't want to let too much away, but of course that's something that we've taken into consideration a lot. Of course, there's lots of competitions. Some of the rewards that we're actually going to be providing with this NFT are competition-based, so they have gamification innately kind of factored in. But again, like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about that. And then in terms of continuity and roadmap, as Jonny really well put earlier on, I think we've started with this low commitment strategy. I think the objective is very much to scale this to make sure that you're not only engaging with your advocacy community, but you're also engaging with your public-facing customers and giving them the same access, if they do have that particular token, to the same rewards that, again, very much have supplementary benefit to your existing brand equity. So I think it's a really exciting project. It's very much end-to-end. I actually used to work for Heath, so I know the business. It's an incredible brand. It's the right time for them to go into the space. But yeah, it has to be seamless because the majority of their customers are very much Web2 centric. So it's been a really exciting challenge, but it's been one that I think, we're delivering on. So that launches on the 31st of May. So yeah, follow Heath on Instagram to find out more.
Yeah, big shout out to Heath. So Heath is one cool project that you guys have worked on. And are there any other projects that sort of combine the worlds of physical art and digital? And you did mention how you took inspiration from the Levi's method of scanning codes, and then that led you to your NFTs. And this is combining the world of physical and digital, which is essentially Phygitals. So that's something that a lot of brands have been doing off late. So are there any other cool projects that you've worked on? Any cool branding strategies that you took for them that you would like to speak about?
John, maybe a good one for you to take through would just be a brief kind of idea of the concept that we built for Ludopals, because obviously we had the in real life and the guarantee in place, which was very much not a carbon copy, but it was very similar to the Levi's initiative.
So there was a brand that we're kind of still in contact with, but we haven't actually kind of activated it yet. So it's a brand called Ludopals. They are a brand that all around sustainability and longevity in their clothing. So we knew that's who they are, and we knew that they could kind of use NFTs to authenticate the clothing, but also come with a guarantee. So having the NFT as a guarantee also means that you're getting more longevity out of their clothes, so it reinforced that brand of who they already are. And so what was it, did we say the NFT would allow someone to have, what was it, a guarantee for 5 years on the clothing? I can't remember what it exactly was. It was a while ago, and we're talking about that.
Yeah, exactly. So the concept itself, to be honest, we built multiple concepts. Some of them they were very different. The one that we actually we loved because it was simple was the fact that you can activate this kind of guarantee via the NFT. Obviously meant that you never lost it, and as Jonny said, it kind of reinforced that brand equity that they had, or their kind of identity around sustainability and longevity. Also the founder, his name's Dan, he is absolutely obsessed with sustainability, and really it was a privilege for us to kind of work with him and build a concept which very much brought his passion to life, because it was so authentic. It wasn't like working with a brand that were kind of greenwashing, talking about sustainability. He had a really strong passion. We also worked on some other concepts with him. So he has a very close relationship with
Woodland Trust,
which, for those of you who don't know, in the UK, is very much a charitable initiative that kind of looks after a lot of the kind of woodland reserves. Dan also loves trees, which kind of works well with his sustainability efforts. And yeah, ultimately, we built a concept that would very much reinforce that, whereby if you wanted to buy into this NFT, he would kind of co-brand with Woodland Trust. And if you buy it, then of course you can plant a number of trees. You get the coordinates of those trees and then your kind of smart contract. That could be an opportunity. Obviously, there's gamification there as well built in. But then, I think a lot of that was quite complex. There were lots of different moving parts. And again, as to kind of how we approach with brands, we want to keep it quite simple, keep to that low commitment strategy. And the most simple way of kind of doing that was almost building that kind of guarantee into his clothing. But again, for kind of Dan and Ludopals, we did build again a 3-phase kind of launch method, starting with the guarantee, moving up into the kind of sustainability in the Woodland Trust with a secondary partner. And then looking at kind of metaverse ready clothing, which I think is something that he was really excited about. But of course, that is that's complex. So I think you have to just kind of pick and choose your battles sometimes.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, you are adding sort of utility to these digital concepts. If I talk about scanning a certain QR code and getting a warranty on your clothes, or even having a D-app or a smart contract sort of execute whether you planted a tree or something like that. So how do you plan these things ahead of the curve, and where all you're able to add utility into these concepts? How do you plan that? Does this go according to the brand values, or as per the founders' ideas or ideals? And try to bring utility to these concepts.
I think what we do is we identify ourselves, who the brand are, what they stand for. We go away and brainstorm, and we think, okay, how can we provide real value to the customers that the customers will actually want, and that again reinforces who the brand is. So it's definitely something that we work on without kind of the brand owner or the business owner. And then when we present, we usually kind of go with a few different concepts, and we speak to them. What do they like? What don't they like about it? And then we'll tweak the project.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of staying ahead of the curve, anyone entering now is ahead of the curve. Okay, you know, we're in that infantile stage. A lot of people are aware of it, but a lot of people haven't actually made that commitment into a Web3 strategy. I know some brands have, like Starbucks, like L'Oreal, for example, or even Levi's, but the vast majority of businesses have not considered activating a Web3 strategy. So anyone that we work with is already ahead of the curve, particularly smaller businesses, I feel, because these bigger ones have got the money and resources to do something and take that risk a little bit more. Whereas the smaller ones, just like Ludo Pals or like Heath Skincare, it is more of a risk for them because they just don't have that capacity that the other big brands do. So yeah, we would just encourage them to start with this low commitment strategy, because that's a way that you can kind of get involved, have some exposure to Web3 without kind of going head first into the deep end. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Also, how important are communities? I mean, I think for every question that I had, in the answer somewhere or the other, I could hear the word communities, and we cannot deny the fact that Web3 is built on the very close-knit communities that we have for projects. So how important are communities for projects, for brandings, and how do you work alongside communities for different brands?
Yeah, massively important. I think that's what distinguishes Web3 from Web2, is that more community aspect. And when we're working with these service providers like Perks, for example, it's very much a plugin that's in development. So we're actually working with them to advise on how they can better cater the plugin in order to enhance that community aspect, whether it's through chat rooms or whether it's through how you can communicate by connecting your wallet, so you're just communicating with the people that hold the NFT. I think that's kind of where we see it. But always the best thing about NFTs is you can identify that super fan, and they're the ones that are talking about your brand already. They're the ones that are buying your brand already the most. And so by using NFTs to identify who they are, it's something that you didn't have access to before, and we can use that to get in touch with them and to elevate them even more than they already are.
Right. Yeah, I actually think I think, John, you touched on a great point there. I think brands need to recognize that, of course, having a community is very beneficial to that community and to, you know, whoever they are, whether they're your customers, whether it's your advocacy pool, your influencers, whatever. I also think it has a big advantage to the business, and more companies need to recognize that, in my opinion. I think that recognizing that, as Jonny said, who your super fan is, being able to monetize them, understanding who has more of an emotional interest in your brand so that you can speak to them more. You can do this kind of thing with CRM, but with Web3, it's bolstered. And I think a lot of the things that we also talk about is kind of taking your customer and turning them into an invested stakeholder of your brand. If you look at what brands have been trying to do now for the last 10, 15 years, actually, arguably, big brands have been trying to do it for the last decade. All people want to do is build an emotional relationship with their customer, because that emotion leads to loyalty. And that emotional relationship is so much easily fostered if someone is a stakeholder of your brand and not just a customer. And I think that that's the power of community. That's the power of giving someone a bit of an insight into your brand. There's a long way to go, I think, for service providers. Jonny and I have been brainstorming this week. I mean, we're not going to launch a product anytime soon, but there are lots of opportunities for different kind of services to come into the space and actually give businesses tools to really kind of supercharge their community building efforts. And I think that they're probably going to appear in the next year, and certainly as kind of more companies and businesses move into Web3 initiatives and they do it properly, and people like Nike continue to recognize that this is the next big step in their digital transformation, more mass adoption will come about, and then naturally these kind of new solutions will just keep appearing, and we see them appearing now. And I think, full circle back to initially what you asked, Rooney, in terms of how do we actually stay ahead of the curve? obviously Jonny mentioned, everyone's within the space are somewhat ahead of the curve now. One thing I'll say is that I remember the digital transformation. My first ever role at L'Oreal was in one of the first centralized digital teams in the luxury division. And that moved at a pace to the point where I thought I couldn't keep up. Web3 is like that on steroids. Building your network, attending conferences, listening to podcasts. We're really lucky that we've got this media at our fingertips because that allows us to learn constantly because the curve changes every single day. So I think that's how you stay innovative. That's kind of, you have to understand, that you have to be someone in the room with your ear firmly kind of engaged because you just need to make networks and obviously educate yourself all the time.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. We're heading almost to the end of our time, and I have one final question for the two of you. If you work obviously really closely with startup founders, CEOs, and if there are 3 tips that you have to give, 3 or 5 or whatever number, if there are a few tips that you have to give to founders for them to plan ahead in terms of marketing, in terms of branding, what would they be? Because we cannot deny that branding and marketing in Web3 is as crucial as it was in Web2, despite the space being decentralization or whatever, rather that. So what would be the advices that you give to founders that are sort of planning to launch their product or are planning to launch their businesses in this space?
I think for me, number 1 would be work with people with experience. Don't just try, as I mentioned before, don't just try and use people that you already have because it's not going to go well if you do. It would be also keep things simple as well, because especially when you're starting out, if you overcomplicate things, and as Connor touched on with Ludopaz earlier, we came up with this really interesting concept around like planting trees and working woodland, getting limited edition clothing. And actually, to start out, that was too complicated. So keep it simple, and yeah, allocate the correct resources is what I would say. Yeah, be realistic.
Yeah.
No, those do make sense. Connor, would you like to add?
Yeah, sure. So in terms, I think my 3. So first of all, I think companies need to recognize that this isn't completely alien and isolated to their current business. I think that this is the next evolution in your digital transformation. That's a very, very important point for me. And this is something that we'll see a lot more companies adopt in the future. My second is that don't be afraid to align your initiatives to traditional KPIs. Actually, one of the things that I talk about a lot is that there are lots of similarities between Web 2 and Web 3. They're not different goals. Web 2 companies and marketing efforts, they want to build communities. They want to emotionally engage with their customers and turn them into stakeholders. They just don't have the technology and the tools that allow you to do that. Web 3 gives you those tools. It gives you the opportunity to actually do that. So that's one of the second points. The third, don't be afraid. The reason why Jonny and I, and obviously Elliot and another NFT exists is because we recognize that there are lots of opportunities for companies to adopt things like low commitment strategies. You don't have to do something which costs a fortune. You don't have to do something which risks ruining the brand equity that you built for many, many years. Don't be hasty. Keep your ear to the ground. As Jonny said, work with people that, of course, know what they're talking about. And launch a low commitment strategy, keep it simple. I think those would be the 3 that I'd very much focus on.
Keep it simple and don't be afraid. And on that optimistic note, we would love to end this episode today with Connor and Jonny. Thank you so much for joining us today. And it was a great pleasure to be chatting with you on this Saturday morning. And big shout out to both of you. I request all our viewers and listeners to go ahead and follow them and follow Heath Skincraft and other projects that they're involved with, and keep a vigilant eye on what these 2 men are doing.